Welcome to episode 7 of the Penny Family History Slideshow. Once again, my name is David Penny. In this episode, we're going to be covering off the family from after they're established in Toronto until the birth of my dad, Douglas Allan Penny. We'll take a look at what the city looked like back in the 1920s, and we'll look at my grandmother, Phyllis Penny, and her rather complicated family and origins, and then their romance, to the extent we know about it from the photographs, their marriage, and the birth of their first son, Douglas. So before we get started, as always, I can put it on pause if you'd like. All right, get your favorite beverage. I prefer Scotch whiskey, of course. And let's have a toast to the Penny family history and the successful execution of the Penny Family History Slideshow. Cheers. Once again, just to refresh our memories, recall John Clark Penny, my great-granddad, and his wife Anne Gavin Ross came to Toronto, immigrated to Toronto in the 1920s. They had several kids. Jim, who came and then went to the Caribbean and married Aunt Winnie. Jack, who died in the war before immigration. Alec, who joined the family in Canada and was a real integral part of the family. There was Annie, who came to Canada but died early, and she had a child, Mal, out of wedlock, still in Scotland. And Mal was adopted by John and Anne. And then their youngest son, Allan, who came over to Canada when he was just 16. So in this episode, they've come over. They started out as farm workers initially. And then Allan and Alec both got good jobs as bridgemen, building bridges and culverts with the Canadian National Railway. And they became quite established in Toronto, it looks like, and not rich by any means, but doing okay. Then Allan, in this episode, we'll see Allan meeting Phyllis and eventually having their first son, Douglas. That's what we're going to cover off this time. So first, we'll have a look at what old Toronto looked like in those days. This, for instance, is the Capitol Theatre on Yonge Street in 1921. You can see the streetcar tracks have been newly laid over here, and you can see that the road is still pretty rough at this point, the old cars. By comparison, this is what the Capitol Theatre looks like today, and this was the primary movie theater that my dad and Uncle Mel and everybody went to back in the day. There they are side by side. You can see them by comparison. Here is the streets Duplex and Eglinton in 1922, right around when the family arrived. Quite a difference from then and now. This is Yonge Street at Lawrence Avenue, looking north up along Yonge in 1922. And still horses doing a lot of the work of hauling things around. This is what it looks like today. We actually live just up here, and we used to live just over there on that side, and my dad was actually born just over here on that side as well. There's the comparison, the before and after, the difference of that 100 years makes. Here's downtown. We're on Queen Street West, looking towards Yonge Street. There's the comparison of the two. It was actually busier back then. It was bustling. Here's a scene in winter looking on Bay Street, looking north up to Queen Street. And that's the old City Hall before they built the fancy modern City Hall in Toronto. See, not too different. Now, sometime in around 1927, Allan Penny, when he was 22 years old, and Phyllis Watts, when she was 23-year-old, they first meet. And I have a theory about how they were introduced, which I'll get to in a moment. And now, Allan, by this point, had been a bridgeman on the CNR for the past 2 years. And Phyllis was working as a stenographer, a secretary in downtown Toronto for an insurance company. They marry about 2 years later. So this is my grandmother. Here's a few photos of her. That's Allan again there, and my grandmother at various ages. She was terrific making pie. She was a simple farm girl, very unassuming, very religious upbringing. And later in life, she went away from whatever her childhood church was, and she became devoted to Mary Baker Eddy's Church of Christ Scientist in later years. They put out the Christian Science Monitor. They believe in the power of healing yourself through Jesus. Mary Baker Eddy was quite an odd individual, but she founded a modern-day religion in the late 1800s, I believe. My grandmother was an adherent to that. She was often at the Christian Science reading room doing volunteer work and just doing studies. She was extremely healthy her whole life. She never got a cavity her entire life. I don't remember ever being ill until quite late in life when Papa picked her up and gave her a big hug and swung her around, which he was wont to do, and unfortunately broke her hip because she had a bit of osteoporosis going on. But that was the only thing I can recall where she was at all ill in her life. Papa got quite senile, and Papa Nana was following along, was getting a bit senile herself. And my mom and dad put them into a home where they got to live together. It was a little apartment within a care facility. And my granddad eventually died. He was quite senile, and he drank some cleaning fluid off a cart that was left unattended, guzzled it, thinking it was a beer. And he passed from that. And my grandmother was never the same after that. She didn't seem to have much of a will to live after that. And about a year later, she passed from very natural causes. But she was an absolutely lovely woman. I knew her very well. We visited every Sunday. We were with them up at the cottage quite constantly. And she never pushed her views on anybody else. And she never prevented her children or her husband from seeking medical aid. And she never really herself resisted going to doctors very much, except she just didn't need them for the most part. Anyways, that was my grandmother. So let's go look a little bit back at her life. So this is the baby picture we have of her. This is in my grandmother's hand. She scribbled her own name, Phyllis, on her baby picture. And I found her birth certificate. Phyllis Marjorie Garbutt, born in Manitoba in Winnipeg. And her mother is Mary Jane Garbutt. And there's no father given. And you can see the date on that, born in 1904, June 19th, 1904, in Winnipeg. Her mother was Mary Jane Garbutt. She was born in 1871 in Middlesbrough, Yorkshire, England. Her father was Richard Garbutt, also born in Yorkshire, and her mother was Elizabeth Ann Trattles, we believe, also born in Yorkshire. She's the eldest sister of siblings John, Hannah, Thomas, and Charles. Mary Jane Garbutt immigrated to Canada in 1891, age 20. It doesn't appear she came with anybody else. She may have been on her own. And she moved from Winnipeg to Toronto by 1908 and married a farmer in Richmond Hill named Walter Watts. By the time she moved, my grandmother was already born, so she moved with her baby, and Walter Watts adopted the baby, which was my grandmother, Phyllis. Here's an early childhood photo, and it's got the names of the people written on the back. And Phyllis identified herself as this little girl here, and that's her mother. That's Mary Jane Garbutt here. This is Mary Jane's sister, Hannah, and this is Edith, which is Hannah's daughter. And we'll see Edith come back a bit later. It's not specified on the photograph who this is, but there seems to be a distinct family resemblance, and based on the age, and there's some other photos where she is identified. We believe that's Elizabeth Garbutt, which is the mother of both Mary Jane Garbutt and Hannah Garbutt. And this appears to be taken in Toronto. Here we have the marriage certificate of Mary Jane Garbutt and Walter Watts, which took place on November 9th, 1908. Walter was 30 and Mary Jane was 35 at the time. Now, the Watts farm was in Richmond Hill. Walter Watts was a farmer. I believe it was his dad's farm, and he was farming it as well. This is a little map of Toronto in the top left corner. This is North Toronto, down where the family was and where we live. And up here is Richmond Hill, just north of the city. The farm is identified as being behind the old True Blue and Orange orphanage. And this was the orphanage. It was completed in the 20s, early 20s. It started many years before that, a decade before that at least. But it was an orphanage, and all the orphans were required to wear uniforms when they were in and around, so you know they were orphans apparently. The old True Blue was a society, a Presbyterian kind of society, and then the Orange Society as well, and they got together to do it. That building still stands in Richmond Hill. Here it is. And we've zoomed in on the map here. This is the street that connects here is Yonge Street. And here's Yonge Street, and there's the orphanage over there. And then there's land that belongs to the orphanage, it looks as if. And then the land behind it over here, which there's now a subdivision, looks like that was the Watts family farm. And that's a picture of what the Watts family farm now looks like. Here's a satellite view of the same thing. This is the orphanage. This is orphanage grounds, and then it backs on to was probably the area of the farm. And here's what Richmond Hill looked like around 1910. So it was like it wasn't part of Toronto. It was its own little town, but you could get to Toronto. It looks like the streetcar could help you get there. So Walter Watts has a rather complicated life, as you can see. He married multiple times because his wives kept dying on him. So his first wife was Ada Mary Watson. There were two children with her. The younger was Pearl, and the older was Aunt Vera of those two children. When Ada passes, he, not too much later, clearly remarries Mary Jane Garbutt, who was just in from Winnipeg. And Mary Jane brings Phyllis along with her. Right, so he adopts Phyllis, and then together with Mary Jane, they have three more children. That is Aunt Bessie, whose first name is really Janet Elizabeth Watts. She went by Elizabeth or Bessie when she was young, and as she was older, she said, please don't call me Bessie anymore. But we all really know her as Aunt Bessie. And Bessie was very religious. She belonged to some Christian belief where they were evangelical, so they tried to convert people, and she was always very low-key about it. She wouldn't talk about it at all, but every time she visited, after she left, you found a Bible. She would just surreptitiously just leave a Bible wherever you were, and so that was Aunt Bessie. And then there's Madge, born after that, Margaret, and Georgie, born after that, to Mary Jane Garbutt. Mary Jane passes in 1919 when Phyllis was only 15 years old, and Georgie was only 5. And he remarries, again, not too far beyond that, a woman named Grace McNair. But they don't have any children. They're a bit old by then for kids, but Grace McNair kind of acts as the grandma. Pearl marries a fellow named Lou Gosselin, and they move off to the States, first to Buffalo or Detroit, and then eventually to California. Now, Vera marries a fellow named Sewell Whaley in 1928. Now, Sewell Whaley is of the Sewell Whaley Animal Feed and Forage Store at 17 Keewatin. And recall that the family house was at this point, was at 367 Keewatin Avenue. And no doubt they perhaps had some business as well with Sewell Whaley. But they lived in an apartment above the store in front of large storage sheds for baled hay and straw in the backyard area. That was my dad's description, which he remembers from when he was a kid. So Vera and Sewell seem to meet earlier than Allan and Phyllis. So I suspect that Sewell introduced Allan to the sister of Vera, which was Phyllis, and that's how they likely met. But what's also interesting about the family is that apart from Vera and Pearl, for the other 4 sisters, 2 brothers marry 2 sisters twice. Allan Penny marries Phyllis, but Alex Penny, a few years later, marries Aunt Bessie. And then the other pair of sisters and brothers is Roy Jarvis marries Margaret Watts, and Herschel Jarvis, his brother, marries Georgina Watts. So we have Roy and Herschel, and Allan and Alex. And I remember Roy and Herschel from when I was a kid coming up to the cottage. They were jovial, slightly overweight gentlemen, and they'd sit down with Allan and Mal, and they'd have a good laugh. They'd drink, and they'd have a fantastic laugh. And I'm sure when Alec was alive, it was Alec, Allan, Roy, and Herschel having a great laugh together. They were always extremely joyful, I seem to recall. So complicated, as I said. And for my cousins, if you always wondered, like I did, who's Aunt Winnie? I remember Winnie was not related. She was Uncle Jim. And then there's Aunt Pearl and Aunt Vera, and then Aunt Bessie, Aunt Madge, Aunt Georgie. Well, now you know how they're all related one to the other. You can thank me later for figuring that out. We all knew this, but it's nice to get it on a piece of paper. So here is Walter Watts. He looked like a very youthful and vigorous fella. And this is not Mary Jane. This is Hannah Garbutt, Mary Jane's sister at this point, and Elizabeth Garbutt, the mother. Now, there aren't very many pictures of the 6 sisters together, but here's one of them. This was at the cottage at Leonard Lake in May 1964. That's how the photo is labeled. And so we see from left to right, Auntie Pearl, Aunt Georgie, Aunt Vera, Aunt Bessie, Aunt Madge, and Phyllis, the 6 and a half sisters all together at the cottage. And I was 2 years old at this point when that photo was taken. And here we have, again, at the same occasion, we believe, in May of 1964, again, we have standing left to right. That's Vera, Madge, Bessie, and Georgie. And then down here we have Phyllis there and Aunt Pearl there. And here's a somewhat earlier photo of 5 of the 6 sisters. Pearl is absent. Either she's taking the photo or perhaps, I believe by this point, she's moved to the States with Lou Gosselin, so maybe she's no longer there. But this is Phyllis, Vera, Madge, Bessie, and Georgie, and Walter Watts over here. Again, looking still quite vigorous for his age. And there's Walter Watts after he remarried to Grace McNair, and that's taken in sometime in the 1930s. And there's a family gathering, again, taken sometime around 1935. And we see Grace McNair over here and Walter Watts over here, and a number of the sisters. I'll zoom in on them for you. There they all are, and I've attached a label to them. So there's Phyllis over here, my grandmother, Bessie, Madge, Vera, Georgie, Walter Watts, Grace McNair, as I said. That's Sewell Whaley. And again, this photo was labeled by, I think, my grandmother. And Sewell and Vera are the two that are married. And we don't know who the other people in the photo are. Here's another picture, a little bit earlier, 1916, of the family. This is, again, my grandmother labeled it, and this she labeled as herself. And that appears to be her mom, Mary Jane Garbutt, back there. And this gentleman is not Walter Watts, but and it's not labeled. He's not labeled who he is, but given the circumstances, he's probably Watts, Walter's father. You can see he's got the hat and the beard and the thing. He may be some kind of a Mennonite kind of thing. They were very, very religious, anyways. And I imagine these were some of the sisters or half sisters of Phyllis. There's Phyllis around 1919. Phyllis goes to work in the 20s as a stenographer for an insurance company in downtown Toronto. And here she is in the stenographer's pool. And this is Phyllis here. And I'll zoom in on this in a moment. And this is her very good friend, Freda Leder, over here. And I'll show more of Freda in a moment. But there she is working in the stenographer's pool at the insurance company. There's, I blew it up and enhanced it a little bit. That's Phyllis on the right over here. And that's Freda Leder on the left over there, her very best friend, who's actually Swiss and immigrated as a baby. There they are again, seated right to left. Again, this is Freda over here, and this is Phyllis over here. Again, taken around the same time, the stenographer's pool. And Freda had a sister called Mary Leder. And so this is Phyllis over here, Freda and Mary. Now, Mary Leder later married a fella named Earl Willis, and she became Mary Willis. And on Leonard Lake, my granddad bought 2 lots on Leonard Lake, adjoining lots. Half of one of the lots was taken over by Earl and Mary. They were very, very good friends. To say Mary was a very good friend. Her sister, an even better friend, but I believe her sister passes at some point. And I knew, of course, Mr. Willis. We all knew Mr. Willis and his dog Omar up at the cottage, but that's the connection. Now here's another group picture. We see this is Phyllis over here. It's marked on the back of the photograph that this is Phyllis, looking rather, I think, risque for a religious girl, don't you think? But whatever. I believe this is her friend, Freda Leder, based on her facial features and how they're standing, and not one of her sisters. That's Walter Watts there. This is Aunt Hannah here. And it looks like this is sometime after Phyllis's mom passed. And I think Hannah came to stay with them for a while because there were a lot of kids. A lot of her kids. She left a number of kids behind. I think Hannah probably came to help out. She's in a lot of these photographs of this time. There's Aunt Madge over there, and that's Aunt Vera here and Sewell Whaley. And they're not married yet, but they are dating at this point. Now, of course, Sewell is 13 years older than Vera, and he's 14 years younger, only 14 years younger than Walter, her dad Walter. So he's in between the two of them. And given that Sewell had a animal feed store and Walter ran the farm, I think it's likely that these two did business together. That's how Vera got introduced, and then And then, as I say, Sewell lived on the same street down in Keewatin, and so perhaps that's how Phyllis and Allan met. Here's Freda and Phyllis around 1920. And here's Freda over here, Phyllis and Mary around 1925. They look like they could cause some trouble, those girls. That to my eyes, that does not look like Phyllis, but it's marked in Phyllis's own hand that that's Phyllis. So I will take my grandmother at her word that she recognizes herself. This is a photo I found of Freda Leder, a beautiful young lady. And there's a caption that's written by Phyllis. It's Freda Leder, Mary Willis's sister. My very close friend had passed away. So we're unsure when she passed. I can't find any death records for her. It's sometimes past the 1940s, at which point we have the last photos of her. But she later actually rooms with Phyllis and Allan. Here, left to right, is Aunt Madge, Aunt Vera, Sewell, and Sewell Whaley, and Phyllis. And this is in May of 1925, and Vera and Sewell will marry 3 years later. So they're going out, they're stepping out for quite some time before they get married. This is the earliest photo we have of Allan and Phyllis. And again, that one doesn't quite look like Allan to my eyes, but it's marked on the back that that's Allan and Phyllis. And this is a fellow named Rolly Lang and Freda Leder. I'm not sure if they ever get married, Rolly and Freda, or not, but they date for quite some time, and they go on trips together. The four of them go on little trips up to Muskoka together. We have some evidence of that. And this is the photo of in 1927, very soon after they started dating. And here Allan is up visiting the Watts family in Richmond Hill. This is, according to the caption, this is the entranceway to the Watts family farm, which is down there. Well, so Allan got really dressed up for the occasion. Perhaps it was a Sunday. That's really, these photos are like my grandmother, like I've never seen her before. Remember the first photo I showed you of my grandmother as an old lady. That's, of course, how I remember her. It just shows the march of time. Here's Phyllis and Allan on a tennis date. This was, I had to enhance this photo quite a lot, hence the kind of rather odd features around the eyes, but it was unrecognizable before I worked on it. But you can see the tennis rackets down here, and people holding tennis rackets, and they're dressed in their tennis whites. And I can't imagine Allan Penny playing tennis, but there you have it. What we'll do for love. Again, same problem. The AI made them a little demonic looking, but they were up in Muskoka in 1928. Again, before they were married, they traveled up to Muskoka, and this is Phyllis in her risque bathing suit at Wasaga Beach in 1928. The old car over there on the right. And here's Allan in Port Carling in 1928. You'll recognize Port Carling as very close to the cottage at Leonard Lake. And these are the locks at Port Carling. Now, Sewell and Vera, they marry on September 14th, 1928, after a rather long dating relationship. And soon after that, just in 1929, April 12th, Phyllis and Allan marry, and this is their wedding photo. This is the marriage certificate for the two of them, Allan Bruce Penny and Phyllis Marjorie Watts. The witness is Sewell Whaley at 17 Keewatin, and the other witness is Allan's brother, Alex Penny, living at 367 Keewatin Avenue in Toronto. And the name of the of the bridegroom's father is John Clark Penny. The bridegroom's mother is Anne Gavin Ross. The name of the bride's father is Walter Watts, and the bride's mother, Mary Jane Garbutt. And you can see the occupation of Allan listed as a bridgeman, aged 23 years old. He's a bachelor. And Phyllis was a stenographer, age 24, a spinster. I always thought spinster meant an old unmarried woman, but I guess it meant any unmarried woman at that time. Presbyterian for Allan and United Church for Phyllis. They lived up in Thornhill, which is also kind of Richmond Hill. And place of birth is Scotland for Allan and Manitoba for Phyllis. So all of this is very, very consistent with all the information that's come before. So both Allan and Phyllis are working, and they have little time and little money. So they take a weekend honeymoon up in North Bay using Allan's CNR rail pass, because he works on the railway. He gets free passage on the trains. And another one of Allan. At the time, they live in a flat on Galley Avenue in the High Park area. Allan probably worked in lots of railway tracks down here, so he probably was very close to work. And his family was up here on Keewatin, about 10 kilometers away. And eventually Allan, before too long, by the time Douglas is born, or perhaps as a result of Douglas being born, they move back up into this neighborhood over here on Woburn Avenue. Now, Phyllis spends the winter and spring after she gets married with Aunt Hannah and Uncle Charlie, Charlie Thompson, and their daughter Edith, who married and became Edith Headington in California. The trip is a wedding gift from Allan to Phyllis, and she can travel freely by rail on his pass. And she has family there who looks after her when she gets there. So she's away for a good long time, traveling around in California, which was really the thrill of her life. She didn't travel very much, and getting down off to California was a real treat for her. And there she is. And if you recall that crying little girl in that earlier photo, that's cousin Edith grown up. And there's Phyllis, and there's Aunt Hannah. And this is Gwyneth, which is Edith's baby, born in 1929. The caption by Phyllis on this one reads, "With the Roses," at 302 Branch Street in Los Angeles, April 12th, 1930. Again, we see Hannah, Phyllis, and Edith here. No baby in this. A few more photos around California. They go to visit the old mission and things like that. And this is at the mission in Riverside, California in 1930. And again, we see Hannah here, Phyllis there, Gwyneth, the baby there. And that doesn't look like Edith, but it must be Edith. Here they are in Mount Low and Peak Mountain. And there they are again. That's cousin Edith over there. And so here as well. And that's Aunt Hannah and Phyllis. I'm not sure who that is. And this is labeled, it's written on the back, Phyllis on the way home on the Santa Fe, which is the railway that goes way down to California, in April of 1930. That doesn't look like Phyllis waving. It looks like that could almost just be a publicity shot for the Santa Fe, but so you'll have to judge for yourself. Now, the family spends time up in Muskoka. So they vacation in the summers. They live in Toronto, and they vacation in the summers up in Muskoka. The current cottage that we still own now is up at Leonard Lake, up here. The first cottage the family got was at Wabashine, which is over here. It's on Georgian Bay, a little outcropping of Georgian Bay. That's at Wabashine over here. But before they even acquire the Wabashine cottage, this is before that even, the family just goes up and camps at Morrison Lake is one place, and they later camp at Wabashine before getting the cottage. And they also spend time at a resort at Cache Lake. So here is Phyllis at the Cache Lake Resort in the summer of 1930. This is on the same trip. You'll recognize this as the Spillway and Railway Bridge in Bracebridge. That's what it looked like in the summer of 1930. And there's Phyllis on that's Lake Muskoka there, summer 1930 again. There's Rolly Lang. Remember, that's Freda Leder's boyfriend or husband, and Allan Penny in a canoe on Lake Muskoka in the summer of 1930. Again, there's a caption on the back of the photo that gives us this information. So I imagine Freda was probably with them as well if Rolly was there. And there's Phyllis and Allan in the summer of 1930. And here they are camping on Lake Morrison. So that's Phyllis and Allan here on the right. So the caption tells us that's clearly Allan. I never recognized Phyllis when she's this young. This old fella, we believe he's the farmer on whose land that they're camping. And these are friends of theirs over here. Here's the same crowd. That's Allan over here. Phyllis doesn't appear to be in the picture, or at least I hope not. That's Uncle Alec here. And he's a friend sitting on his lap is showing off his big penny ears, which are a remarkable family feature, the penny ears. There's the old codger and a young lady in a bathing suit giving him a fulsome kiss on the mouth with a big hug. So that was perhaps a bit scandalous. They're having fun anyways. There's Uncle Alec there. Looks like they're getting rainwater to make their tea. And there they are having more fun. Again, that's that same fella if I confused for Uncle Alec. Uncle Alec has a pipe that looks a lot like that, but that is not Uncle Alec. The label on the back says that's Allan, and next to him looking down into his beer, he's concentrating on pouring a beer, obviously, is Uncle Alec. There's a great photo of Uncle Alec and Allan Penny. And Uncle Alec is holding a scythe, a big blade for chopping the grass. And that's his signature corncob pipe and his signature hat that Alec has on. And there's Allan holding him at bay so as not to be sliced by the scythe. And that's how the caption reads. And it wasn't only the younger generation. There's Granddad, Jock Penny, and Malcolm on Lake Morrison, and the lady holding the fish that it looks like the two of them just caught. It was the wife of the farmer on whose land they camped. So I think the farmer was that older fella, and that's his wife, who doesn't look like she's likes putting up with that tomfoolery where the young lady's kissing her husband like that. But Mal seems to be very proud of that fish. But all good things must come to the end, and this is Uncle Alec, far right, and back at work, working on the railway in 1930. And Uncle Mal is back at school in the fall of 1930 at John Fisher Public School back in Toronto, and that's Uncle Mal there just off the shoulder of the principal. Perhaps that's the teacher. He's the principal. Mal doesn't look terribly happy to be back at school. Mind you, none of the kids do at school. And then on March 3rd, 1931, my dad is born. Douglas Allan Penny, born to Phyllis and Allan Penny. That's my dad in the baby photos, and that's Phyllis holding him. There we go. So I guess we'll end it there for this episode with Douglas having just been born, the first child, And we'll pick it up next time with more baby photos of my dad and some very interesting information about the houses that they lived in and who they were living with. So definitely come back for that episode. And in the meantime, a final toast. Here's to the Penny family. Cheers.